Record.
Thank you, Jerry. It's good to see everybody this morning. It's wonderful to be virtual and not have to fly so far to talk. I am going to start out by why am I here? Why am I talking? A little bit about my history, and then I'm going to jump right into Jung psychometrically, and that might surprise some of you to even be talking about that, since Jung never produced any instruments or anything, but the psychometrics of type actually starts back with Jung. And so a little of why am I talking? What are my credentials? My psychometric history is different than what a lot of people would think. It started actually with the Mmpi to measure personality, but my major professor was Fred Morgan, the strong interest inventory. Some may know that, but he wanted to steer me away from the MBTI and toward the MMPI for my personality learning. Fred was a very bright man, is a very bright man, and his dissertation was the factor analysis that developed the strong interest inventory basic interest scales. And his major professor was David Campbell. You might remember we used to refer to it as a strong Campbell interest inventory. Fred really knew psychometrics, and he tutored me a great deal. I'd taken the MBTI Form G in summer of 1987, and the results were very accurate. I was interested in learning more, and I was fascinated looking back at the time. It's really interesting. I wasn't aware that large portions of the MMPI, the original, and the Myers-Briggs, the indicator that Isabel Myers referred to it as, were originally constructed psychometrically in very similar ways. And a lot of people wouldn't make that connection. I went to the first training of the MMPI-2 at the University of Minnesota in 1990 and met Green and Tellegen and other people that were there and listened to talks and asked some questions. Hathaway and McKinley developed the original MMPI in the 30s and 40s using an empirical approach to scale construction. This new measure was being developed based on, something that was really interesting at the time. It was connected with people. I'll get into that more. All things today tend to be based upon factor analytic and latent class analysis and alphas, many things like that. And I'll talk more about that and what's happened through type. So Isabel Myers' early indicator development was really very parallel to the early development of the MMPI. And that's why I'm bringing that up. While working with Fred, I was hired as a psychometric contractor by Consulting Psychologist Press to work on the 94 Strong. I wrote the scoring routine at 13,000 lines of code and performed all the psychometric analysis except for the multicultural stuff that was done by Nadia Fuad. Some of you may know her. Then I continued to work for CPP on the MBTI Form M as a consultant. Other than the development of the IRT scoring, which RJ Harvey did, I did all the research psychometrics on the project. I was hired by CPP as a research scientist in 1998. I was assigned all the MBTI instruments. I began to meet the family and to work with individuals all over the world that were involved with the MBTI. I was the psychometric analyst and developer of the IRT scoring for Form Q at CPP. And then I was hired by CAPT, C-A-P-T, the Center for Applications of Psychological Type. I was a director of research in 2000 and became the first director of the Step 3 project at CAPT. Here's where my understanding of the MBTI psychometric origin occurred. I was given all the letters that Isabel Myers ever wrote to Mary McCully to read for my understanding of what Step 3 was in Isabel's eyes. it was a very, very powerful experience. To read all those letters, there was hundreds of them. Not only did I learn the psychometric development of the indicator, but the relationship between the two brilliant women and others that they spoke about and knew. Keep in mind, this is in the 1970s that this exchange of letters took place. I didn't get to read any of the letters from Mary McCauley to Isabel, but they were embedded in Isabel's responses back to Mary. Then my psychometric history with type moves on to my own assessment, and I'll talk about that, the PTI and the PTE. There are other type measures today, the pyramid, and there's so many more that are out there. I'm not going to speak to them and that I don't know the details about their development. I'll stay with the Myers-Briggs and my own assessments. And I think that I probably will talk in general terms about what's going on with most of them. I learned over the years to ask the question, how do we know that the responses to a question are accurate and meaningful for the research we are conducting? Because all counseling is research. When you ask an open-ended question and you sit back and listen, you're actually doing research with that person. Enough of my history. Now let's jump into Jung's beginning and his psychometrics. Jung's psychometrics were his collection of descriptions for each of the 8 mental functions. A primary, as he called it, or dominant function, was most used by the individual. He tended to refer to all 7 of the others as inferior. Of course, we know the inferior function, or function 8, really talks about what the individual is not able to access typically, directly anyway. His psychometrics were based upon direct observation of clients. And he states in his introduction to the 1923 text, I have observed. Those powerful words, you know, that talks about his psychometric thinking at the time. He was operationalizing his 8 function variables by observing the behavior and the thoughts through the speech. In his counseling research process, he spelled out precisely how concepts of types would be measured. Do I observe this or not? That is the basis of a good research question. This is empirical approach. That's going to be an important term that I use throughout this talk. He concluded that the assignment of each function was based upon behaviors, physical and verbal, that were gathered during the counseling session. He knew it was innate, and he knew he may not be able to look into the mind and gather that information, but he got very good at being able to look at the individual, listen to them, observe them, and really kind of collect that information psychometrically in the mind of what the person was talking about. This psychometrics without paper and pencil, but psychometrics just the same, only in a mental form. It was a collection of observed information. It's used to assign inclusion into a category or not. Are they dominant function, extroverted intuition, like myself? This process was helped by noting what function was not available. Introverted sensing, and boy, it's doesn't work much for me at all, actively anyway, my mental process. A process of elimination is important. Therefore, Jung made his decision of primary function based on what he observed to be active and not active in the person's life. Now, let's move on to Isabel Myers. I'm going to have a drink here real quickly. It was a little cold in the Ozarks this morning, and the air is dry. So it's a little late winter in the mid 30s, probably Celsius about 5, 4. Isabel Myers and her mom, Catherine Briggs, were searching for ways to help people. They were very burdened by things that were happening in the world. And they got a hold of Jung's 1923 text and began to read it and believed it to be an accurate representation of the path that they were on. Isabel Myers asked the question, how do you make a test of personality? She was educated, but certainly not in any psychology and any statistics, psychometrics. But she visited all the Ivy League colleges that she had spent time at with her father of the National Academy of Sciences. So she was young Isabel in pigtails, going around with dad to all these colleges. She met some of the leaders of the college's presidents and stuff. And so she went back in order to learn how to make a psychological assessment. She went back to talk to these people. And here's where the MMPI is important to this conversation. The personality assessments under development at that time were for psychopathology mostly, mental disturbance. During this time, the MMPI was considered to be an example of a really good measure of personality, although not healthy personality typically. So Hathaway and McKinley, in 1940, they say that they were trying to create a reservoir of items from which scales could be constructed in the hope of evolving a greater variety of valid personality descriptions. That doesn't sound too far off from what Isabel was hoping. And so the MMPI was developed on a scale-by-scale basis in the 30s and 40s by Hathaway and McKinley using an empirical criterion keying approach. And we'll be talking about that because that's so important and so involved in the development of my assessment and the MBTI early years. This empirical or criterion keying is an important concept in our discussion of all psychometrics and type. Isabel Myers took what she learned from college professors and began to construct the first indicator, as she called it. She asked the question, what will accurately sort individuals into one end of a dichotomy, and she referred to them as indexes, or the other? Well, truth is, Hathaway and McKinley asked what statement will sort someone into this category of psychological disturbance or not. And so, are they pathological or are they not? And Isabel Myers was looking at, are they E or are they I? Very parallel in a lot of respects. I do not have any evidence that she ever referred to it as empirical keying, the technical term, but it certainly was. Her methodology was empirical keying. She considered each item that she wrote a special piece of research. It was her little babies in a lot of respects. It was common for her to take an item or a question, and during the day, she would ask people which they preferred, this or that. And sometimes she would only ask, do you prefer this? And she would ask them about their thinking, about their experience, about their lives. She got to know them. More often than not, she knew the individual to some extent and had some idea already of what their type was. So she would test items using this method. And the item's ability to classify the individuals at one polar end or the other. For example, did an EI item sort an individuals 60% of the time into E accurately, and did it do as well with I preferring individuals? The criteria was EI attitude. To build a scale, Isabel Myers would evaluate and collect items in order to find enough items, each of which had a high enough percentage assignment accuracy. So she was really interested in that accuracy. She had some items that were extremely accurate, 80, 90%. That's very, very good. Thereby, she'd produce the scales that would sort people correctly. And she would use what was referred to as prediction ratio formulas in order to calculate and produce a scale score. So this empirical keying and prediction ratio formulas is the basis of how the type scales were produced in all the early indicators. This was how personality was measured in that day. It was a state of art of measurement. It's important to note that there were many scales on the indicators back when Isabel Myers started. Also, many items were not dichotomous, and people think that they are, but there were some back there that really were different. The indicators that I know best, with my respect to myself, and Myers' early work was form J, F, and G. And to the best of my knowledge, J and F were constructed without any statistical aid, things like Cronbach's coefficient alpha. And alphas are produced for most instruments, including my own. I'm not sure how much of an aid alpha is in constructing an instrument. It's kind of an after the fact thing. Alpha was not used at all in developing the original MMPI. Those 13 clinical scales that a lot of us may be familiar with had no alphas at all. Empirical keying often does not lend itself to that, and we'll talk about that more in a bit. So does the indicator measure psychopathology like the MMPI? Well, it certainly used to. A lot of people may find that disturbing or surprising, but Isabel Myers had an arrangement with doctors at a lockdown mental institution where they would administer Form J indicators to patients. Isabel, in turn, would give the doctor an evaluation report based on the patient's responses. Scales that measured issues were an important part of the early indicators. And there were a lot of them, folks. There were many, many scales that measured many things. And so she would give very valid information to those doctors. Probably that carryover from hearing about the MMPI early work really got into her thinking, along with some other things from Jung. And I'll get into that in a few minutes here. While research scientist at CPP and director of research at CAPT, I had the honor of spending time with some early founders of the type movement. One of which was Harold Grant, and I'll put a picture up at the end of some of this. I spent time with Harold Grant on a number of occasions. He understood the psychometric construction of Form J and Form F very, very well. He was early in the involvement with Isabel Myers and was to be the first president of CAPT. He didn't know Isabel very well. He knew Mary McCauley and others at CAPT, but he wanted to make CAPT a clinical training organization. He was the first president, actually. Others disagreed and they wanted to make it different. And they won the argument and Harold left. But during my time with him, he taught me many of the nuances of clinical scales on the indicator. They were all constructed, as were the MMPI scales of the time, by criterion keying, connecting the items on the scale with the reality of the individual. This provides the most accurate basic form of validity. And some people would ask, is it reliable? Well, when it comes to repeated measure, it works very, very well. If you use an alpha measure, it typically will not work, as I said earlier. It's because the complexity of finding information about an individual usually goes beyond a just simple homogeneous topic. I know when Hathaway and McKinley were trying to make a scale on psychopathology, the scale 9, they looked at a lot of different behaviors. And if you try to do an alpha with that, it doesn't work at all. Isabel Myers did a lot of scales that looked at a lot of things. And let me tell you, as someone who analyzed this stuff, I had 1.5 million cases of data to analyze while I was the director of research at CAP. You don't get any alphas with this stuff at all. And so they were accurate, but when it comes to alphas, it didn't work. On my own dissertation, I looked at criteria that focus on small groups of people, but it has no reality for people outside of that group. And that's what we're really talking about here. Therefore, the items that form a construct, something that's being measured, do not demonstrate internal consistency, which is alpha. They don't demonstrate internal consistency to those who the construct has no meaning. So I'll give you an example. If I construct a measure to identify a plumber, and the alpha is good when I examine the results of a bunch of plumbers, and that's the intended group, that same measure will not be any good when I assess electricians. It will be meaningful only to the plumbers. This is important to keep this little story in mind. Another person that I had the pleasure of spending a lot of time with was Otto Kroger. And we talked at length regarding the clinical scales and the criterion-based scoring of Form J. The validity of the results were his main concern, and he found the accuracy almost unbelievable. The psychometric accuracy can only occur when items are collected and evaluated based upon the population that they were designed to access. So it's important to keep that in mind. Things are valuable only for the population that they were intended to measure. Mary McCauley was the person I had the most contact with, of course, at CAP. Mary was still very much alive, yet she demonstrated little interest beyond type theory and practice. So she was really the cheerleader of type in a lot of respects. She knew type in a deep and comprehensive way that's very, very hard to find today. She taught me a great deal. Psychometrics were not her thing. I've got a copy of the Atlas of Type right here. And she was into descriptive statistics, and so they hired me for the more advanced things. So why did the psychometric methodology of the indicator of the MBTI change? The measurement community began to be driven by large samples and high alpha and techniques like IRT. I was part of that. These are not bad in and of themselves, and they have their place, particularly in trait measure, but they can be prone to false assumptions in type measure. One of those pesky assumptions is that if I construct an assessment using an exceptionally large sample and get a high alpha on my scales, woohoo, I've done a good thing, right? Well, not for everyone. On the surface, this seems good, and it can be for certain ubiquitous constructs that happen everywhere, like the mental functions of perception and judgment. After all, if you do not have any perception and you do not have any judgment, you're actually clinically dead, because everybody perceives and everybody makes judgments about that which they perceive. You can construct a fine assessment using IRT and alphas if you do not lose contact between the person and the items, the questions. So if you collect 10,000 cases of data, and I've worked with huge samples, 60,000 or so, if you collect that 10,000 cases of data, do you have a personal connection with all 10,000? The psychometrics that I used in the mid 90s to the early 2000s were based upon that thinking. Big samples were great. They make better results. When I did my master's thesis, I collected 711 samples of the MMPI-2 along with other measures. I tortured those college students like you would not believe. They spent hours answering my questions. Looking back, you know, it's very interesting because they're college students. They're not really the best sample. Anyone who studies young college males the freshman year know that psychologically, emotionally, they're about age 13. If you've been around college students, you know what I'm talking about. So we worked hard on the Mbti revisions. Great alphas. Anybody looks at manuals of Form M and Form Q knows we did good work with respect to alphas. While on faculty at CAPT and the director of research, I would work with Gordon Lawrence. He's a wonderful man. Has since passed away. I collected some samples of Form G along with Form M we used in the workshops. Gordon and I wanted to see how well things were working. To our surprise, Form G was better at reporting best fit type than Form M. We thought, you know, how could this be? The alphas for M were far superior, the best. Even though Form M used IRT, and I was part of all that scoring routine, the connection with the individual had been watered down. This result on the MBTI has been consistently found. Prediction ratio formulas are far superior to IRT in constructing a type instrument. I know others listening to me have done some of this research work and talked about it and looked into it. I believe it is the connection with the individual alone that afforded the best type measure. The prediction ratio process makes the difference. And that has to be done item by item, person by person to get things started. Well, I'm going to shift to my own work, my own instruments at this time. Oh, by the way, if anyone who wishes to use my products, you can go to leadersbeacon.com and I'll put a slide up at the end and sign up. He's waiving the fees and you get freebies and stuff at this time if you mention British Association of Psychological Type in this. Enough of that. I left the MBTI project to do my own thing and to get back in a lot of ways to the old MMPI methodology of connecting questions to people, the criterion keying. I was really smitten way back in early Iowa State days with Fred Borgen at how sitting down and talking with a person was so powerful and really gave us the perfect, accurate information. Conversations are wonderful. Being an ENFP, I prefer to do that over writing. For the major personality type inventory, I collected 100 cases of data from people who mostly did not know type. I spent 2 months to 6 months with some of them, meeting with the individuals in groups and alone to assure that they knew what type was and what their type, their best fit type was. Then I collected more from folks that already knew their type very well. People I talked to at conferences, and I spoke to different groups and stuff, type professionals, and I'd have them take my research data, research questions, and calculate the data. The result gave me a very accurate measure, but not as good as I wanted. This gets into some interesting stuff here. As a psychometrician and instrument developer, it is humbling, to say the least, to admit that no question is a perfect question. No question works perfectly for everyone. Isabel Myers talks about that. To think that it does is to deny individual differences. All of us who have written questions on instruments have had the experience of crafting a question and thinking it's a thing of beauty, only to find out that it's ugly and has no effect in producing what it's supposed to. It doesn't yield a valid response. I remember in the Strong revision, because so many people that were writing new questions lived in California, they wrote questions like, enjoy roller skating. Well, that's pretty funny stuff. Yeah, there's not a lot of people, except for young people who have their knees not beat up yet, would enjoy roller skating. And so we ended up throwing a lot of questions out because they didn't fit the majority of the country or the people that would be taking the Strong. When you write questions for psychological type, excuse me, and you think them through and you believe it's good, only if you sit down with a person and ask them, will you find out what's going on? If we believe in individual differences, we can look at a scale that seems to work somewhat and ask, what is it about those individuals for who a type scale doesn't work? It does not sort them correctly. What makes them different? The true way to look at the issue is, why do some of the items on a scale fail? It is not the individual, it's the assessment. I bristle at the early work I did with the MBTI, where they were pushing for this clarity index. If the person's clear on their type. Baloney. It's an index of whether or not the instrument is clear at typing, though. It's not the person. It's never been the person. There's nothing wrong with people. It's the questions. And I really discovered that in a big way, creating my own work.
Mark, you said to remind you when you got to about 35 minutes. So you are at about that point now. So.
Well, I'm doing pretty good. Many who've used criterion keying methodologies have asked this question, why do items fail? Isabel did. I took the information that I developed from my dissertation and applied it to my groups of individuals who did not find my scales accurate, and sorting them into type categories. My dissertation, I proved that a scale may work very well for one group, like I said, plumbers. I didn't use plumbers though, with great alphas, and fail completely for others with terrible alphas. In my instrument development, I found that adding more items that were from the same pool might increase the alphas. For example, a 10 item scale for sorting folks into E and I works fairly well, a good alpha, and sorting was like 83% accurate. That's kind of Myers-Briggs accuracy. And if I added 10 more items from that same pool, the same kind of items, my alphas would grow and become super, approaching 0.9. Wonderful, great alphas. But it does not sort folks any better. Still only 83% or so. So forget the alpha for a minute. Let's go back to the individual for who the scale does not work. So it's the scale that doesn't work. The person works fine. Only when you use different items, not from the same pool, that measure the same thing, but they get at it in a different way. these items work for individuals who do not resonate with the basic scale. You see, that basic scale does not work for people near the midpoint. It's not the scale. It's the items on the scale are not matching to the person. Scale's fine as a basic scale for majority of people. So unless you get items that are different and give those to those people near the midpoint, you will not sort them correctly. Items are atrocious for everyone else. So they work for these people near the midpoint, but they don't work for the other people. Go figure. In fact, if you put the items in, alphas go down. So you're measuring different constructs. Like E and I, you're measuring, E and I has multiple constructs. Of course, we're measuring attitude, but there's different components to attitude, particularly based on just E and I itself. Introverts think of the attitude differently than extroverts. I know I had great trouble writing items because here's this ENFP, and I'm thinking about the psychological energy until I spent time talking with introverts about what they considered to be a good attitude question. I didn't really understand. So the remedy is to give these extra items that work for these people in the mid only to the people in the mid. They're not sorted by the original scale. Sort of computer adaptive testing. I don't know how many people listening to me understand that, but I went to Montreal for a week to learn a lot about that from software writers. When we're near the midpoint, so on my assessment, automatically 5 more items are given, and for the PT elements, actually, they're already embedded. 5 more items are given on that particular dichotomy. The 5 items are intended for the people in the mid, and they work real good to sort them to the left or to the right, but they do not work for the other folks. This is common sense if you believe in individual differences. So you can get accuracy up near 90%, but truthfully, I don't think you'll ever get accuracy above 90% in a general population of people. A lot of people don't stop and think about this, but about 10% of the population at any one time has emotional psychological problems. That's just a research fact. People, depression, anxiety, other psychological things. And so they don't answer correctly. I gave the PTI measure to somebody just a couple of weeks ago who's very seriously depressed. And I get the classic, everything's flat, everything's in the middle, a bunch of neutrals. And so it just doesn't work very well. So these psychological stressors reduce one's ability to respond normally. So going back to criterion Keen for my collection of data from individuals who do not resonate with my initial scales, it produced accurate measure. And I recognize this is important. And I believe that Isabel early on recognized some of this too. All of the dichotomies have more than one construct with respect to people. Now, theoretically, you can say there's attitude, perception, judgments, and then JP, which is, which is used in the outside world, or a lot of people think perception or judgment. But within those, E side, I side, SN, JP, TF, there are multiple constructs within there. And we have to attend to that. But you can only get at that if you talk to a person. You can't get at that by sitting at your computer. Another psychometric issue is forced choice. M, Q, most of the early indicators, G, there's forced choice. Well, Jung didn't do it. And early on, you know, Isabel Myers, she did not do it. Why would anyone do it? There was this, I remember mystical thinking about item selection, that some weird cosmic thing would pull you to the left or pull you to the right. And the great cosmic muffin. It's not true. I would ask people when they made a forced choice, what made them do it? And some people say, I just got tired and went all to the left, all to the right. So there's nothing in there but psychological measurement noise. So Jung never forced people to pick. He just listened to what they said. Isabel Myers listened to what people said. And I really had to learn to do that as I constructed my assessments. And I put in a neutral response in order to avoid forced choice. Some of the early indicator response styles could have 5 or 6 responses. A lot of people don't know that. They weren't just left or right. Because early type assessments were paper and pencil. Skipping a response, you know, professionals would ask them, you know, please decide, even if it's a slight thing, or if you don't understand, you know, don't have to respond, just skip it. But in electronic testing, we don't get that opportunity. On the majors products, when it comes to type scales, I remove a neutral response completely from the calculation of the scale totals because it's noise. It doesn't belong there. And when you remove measurement noise, I find that even if it's a 10 item scale and people hit neutral on 5 items, that if those 5 items are really known by that person, that result is incredibly accurate. So a major difference in the psychometrics of the PTI that I want to talk about is the 8 process scores. A lot of people don't know, but you know, I measure what Jung considered the accessibility and usability of the 8 mental functions in my PTI and PT elements. These scales assess, the extent to which these mental functions are available to that person, usable. Each of the 8 scales is based upon all the type items. So for each scale, all the items are used, and there's different weightings for each item for each scale. Each one has different weights and is based upon, you guessed it, empirical keying. Results are directly connected with what the individual reports as similar to themselves. And the last thing I'll talk about is blockages. And we'll move on to questions and pictures and things. Jung was interested in what blocked an individual from naturally expressing his type. He approached this matter in the same way he did type and the 8 mental functions. It was an empirical keying approach. He would just ask a question and listen to the answers. Isabel was also very interested in this. What blocks people from naturally expressing? In the current forms of the MBTI, I'm not sure they do that at all with the new stuff. I focused upon the constructs of perseverance in difficulties and adaptation to relationships. Based upon empirical or criterion keying, now these items, there is no alpha with these. I mean, some of them 8, 9 items on a scale, and you run an alpha, and it might be 3 or 4, 0.3, 0.4. But do they work? Incredibly well. They give the professional questions to ask, because the person telling the story, when it comes to blockages, telling the story of how they learned, how they did this, how they did that, is the most important thing. But if we don't listen to people, we have inappropriate psychometrics. We have assumptions based on all the statistical stuff. This is so important in counseling, coaching, and just teaching people more about oneself, self-discovery. It's a shorter way of helping a person. You get this information, you ask a question. There's 3 scales on perseverance and 4 on adaptation. And believe it or not, when you add the 2 together, you get this believed ability to succeed. Think about it. If perseverance is good and how you adapt to people is good, your belief in your ability to succeed in what you do by yourself in your life is extremely important. And I find that everybody in business for themselves, their believed ability to succeed is very high. And people that are comfortable working for somebody else and don't really want to go out and try a business by themselves, their believed ability to succeed is typically lower. So very powerful stuff. And it's all based upon the fundamentals of counseling, that empirical approach of asking a question and listening to what the person says. I'm not aware of the current methodologies a lot of people are using at developing any kind of type question. And so I can't really speak to that. But to the extent that they use that empirical approach to develop items and scales, I'm sure their assessments are good and valid. And with that, I'm going to show a couple things. Okay, Jerry, let's see if I got this right. Show screen. Okay, here we go. If you can see this, I hope. This is Harold Grant, Mary McCulley, Peter, Catherine Myers, and this is all CPP, including me, twice the size of me now, but this is all CPP employees. And this Harold was brought in to talk about what he knew about step 3. And he sits down and he says, "Now, hark, Harold the angel will sing." And just hilarious kind of guy, another ENFP. And he sat there and his opening line was, he pulled out a bag of Red Man chewing tobacco and he leans across the table and he says, "Mark, you need to try some of this." And I'm thinking, Harold, why do you want to see me throw up? You know, I cannot tolerate that stuff. And he said, "Because you need to develop your introverted sensing, Mark." That was his intervention in my psychological development. Fascinating person. I had great time with him. Another picture here is this one. This is the very first step 3 meeting at CAPT with Mary and of course Peter and Catherine, other people from CAPT and myself up here. I put all the data up on the board that I was finding out. There's a wonderful group of people. We had the best time. There were others involved, and honestly, people began to look at the very advanced psychometric ways of looking at things, and I knew that that was not going to bear the kind of fruit that I wanted. And that's one of the reasons I parted company with organizations. Last share screen. Is this, I hope I got it. Yeah. This is ad from the publisher of my stuff. Only the PTI is available right now. The PT elements will be available probably in a month and a half, and other measures that I'm working on. So as you can probably see, there's a website if you want to look up my stuff or read about my babblings on psychometrics and things. They're also available there too. That's enough of that. Anyway, questions. Anybody have any questions for me? Jerry, you might have to help me.
I was going to suggest that maybe we take a minute. That Mark's given us an awful lot of material there, and some ideas that I certainly really enjoyed accessing. And maybe if you type questions in chat, that will give a balance of opportunity for extroversion and introversion to make yourself known in the questions. Otherwise, we might just have the other ENFPs, perhaps, Mark. So
Yeah.
let's give it 1 minute and put some stuff in chat, and then I'll read that. Yeah,
wonderful. I tend to, when I work with boards of directors having problem with their boards, I tell them ask a question and then speak only to the extroverts and wait until the introvert is ready. I said, if you go around the room and you start with the extrovert, then the introvert actually has time to think about an answer.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Let's do it. Let's do it the other way for the moment. We'll just take 1 minute of silence, and people put observations or questions in the chat.
Hi, Jerry.
Oh, hi, Jill. Can I just hang on to you for a second until if other people are using the chat until we've done that, and then I'll come straight to you if that's okay.
Yeah. The extrovert diving in.
Exactly. Well, as extroverts and introverts seem to be eschewing the chance to use the chat, let's come to you, Jill. What would you like to say? Or to
it wasn't so much a question. I was very pleased that Mark put the emphasis on listening to the individual as opposed to blindly taking whatever the psychometric instrument told you. And I think that feeds very much into the fact that we only take that as a sort of a straw in the wind, and then we do the best fit process with people. And I think that's so important. So more of an observation rather than a question.
Thank you, Jill. That's true.
It was lovely to see the pictures of Mary and people at CAPS. I fondly remember them when I went over there.
That was 2021 at CAPS.
I was there in 1996.
Mark,
excuse me.
Mark, I was wondering, given your emphasis, which I really liked as Jill did, on the person and the need to listen and the whole sort of embodied counselling experience of getting the process right. And do you actually feel that the sort of mechanized online instrument is even worth doing? Then, I mean, I know you must do because you put so much time and energy into it. But is it runs the danger, doesn't it, of being a sort of mechanistic, machine-based approach to what is an emergent, embodied reality of a person? So how do you square those two in your own mind when you're working on this?
Well, you know, like I said in my talk, I try to incorporate a method of getting past my instrument. That computer adaptive testing is by recognizing that, you know, probably 20% at any one time are not going to like my scale. And so I have got to get them something that works for them. And if you don't honor that, then you run into problems. I don't have anything negative to say about the indicators, the Myers-Briggs at all. It's my old work. But just the other day, I had a couple of individuals that jumped on and take the current A-level assessment, got their results. They took mine, and both of the results from, you know, the online version by the Myers-Briggs were wrong. And there's no very glowing information. It's very positive. And they felt very good. But when we talked about it, and found out it's wrong. This whole thing of taking a test and getting a result, A-level result, without some kind of intervention in between, it just rubs me the wrong way. For psychological type. I do believe, I love being able to give feedback to people electronically. I've always liked that, but just throwing the results at them and saying, here you go.
Yeah. We're coming up to time, but we have got a question in chat from Roger, who says, Mark, what psychometric evidence do you feel the general social science community accepts as legitimate?
Boy, if I understand the question correctly, they really do focus on the large sample stuff. They really do focus on how uniformly a factor analysis comes out. How do things fit those factors? They focus on that a lot. I've done so much of that for different people, for higher universities. They want to see those factors come together, but typically when that happens, people are hurting somebody or they're leaving them out, or, you know, it's the mean, it's the average. And so there's a real problem with all that. So they love the alphas, they love the factor analysis. Latent class modeling is getting in there, but those things fail miserably for a third, a quarter of the people.
Right. So Mark, we've just reached exactly 3:30, so our hour is up. I want to sort of formally finish by saying thank you so much for your input, and also for that pulling us back to the person constantly, even though alongside the rigor of the psychometric instrument. That's been great, I think, for me and probably for many of us. If people can stay online and have other questions, that's fine. Marcus said he can be here for a little while. We also have our networking space on Kumo Space. If you can find that, the details are there on the conference website. So perhaps to be able to meet up with one or two people there. But we need to bring it to the recorded part, at least, of this to a conclusion. So I will do that now, again, with many thanks to Mark. People do stay on and talk further if that's what you would like at this point.